All righty. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. It is not quite noon yet, so I'm going to wait a moment longer just to allow a few more folks to join us. So stay tuned. Alrighty, well, it looks like we have a strong number of attendees already with us this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and get started since we are at noon. Thank you everybody for being with us. My name is Jillian Saul. I am staff of APA Virginia, and APA Virginia is happy to help in hosting the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration webinar series. And this month, we're pleased to present manufactured housing in the Mid-Atlantic. How do we build more? So we'll have some Maryland and Delaware housing perspectives today, and Josh will further introduce our speakers along with the speakers themselves, but I just wanted to quickly drop some important information before I hand it over. So this webinar is certified for CM credit. Whoops, sorry, I did not mean to do that. I will drop the link to the actual credit in the chat once we get started, but this is the number for your information. We really do encourage questions. Please submit the questions through the Q&A versus the chat box. This will just help us keep track of all inquiries. And during the Q&A portion at the end, feel free to use the raise hand feature if you prefer to ask your question out loud. And I can go ahead and unmute you from there. But again, that's just for once we get into the formal Q&A at the end. But if you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to throw those in the Q&A as they come up. And the chat box will remain open if you have any open-ended, or if there's any opportunity for any open-ended response, or if you, for example, need to direct message me if you have any logistical questions. Some other things that I'll drop in the chat in just a moment will be the link to the MAPC YouTube page where you can find all previously recorded webinars in the webinar series, along with this one later today, if not by the end of the week. I will also share the link to the MAPC website page and some other useful information about upcoming webinars in the series and plans for next year. But I will hand it over to Josh Thomas, excuse me, who will further introduce our topic this afternoon and further introduce our speakers. But thank you everybody for being with us. And oh, one final thing, yes, as I'm sure you're aware and are notified on your screens, this webinar is being recorded. Just wanted to make sure that was clear. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, but thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Jillian. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me just a moment. Great. Hopefully you're seeing the slide view, correct? Get a head nod there. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on your lunch hour. We are here today to talk about manufactured housing in the Mid-Atlantic and really the topic of how do we build more. As Jillian said, I'm Josh Thomas. I am a principal planner with the Delaware Office of State Planning Coordination. And I also serve on the board of the Delaware chapter of APA. So here in that capacity today, really trying to bring together this Mid-Atlantic planning collaboration. It's a great group of people that we come together to do to host webinars for you, provide good content, provide good credits. So really happy to represent the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration. As you can see on the title slide here, we've been doing a housing webinar series throughout the calendar year. So, happy that we're going to be talking about manufactured housing today as part of that series. So interesting. Before we actually get into the webinar content, just a story about this background photo. Back in 2023, we took this drone photo of Smyrna, Delaware. This was for our annual report on state planning issues a couple years ago. And we chose this picture because of its mix of housing. And at the time, admittedly, we were looking at just the fact that we had apartments here, we had single family homes here, and in the background had some townhomes. And really, we captured a series of photos in Smyrna. And then this slide deck, I've used this several times for APA Delaware related presentations. And I was putting this together, and I thought it'd be fun to start with this because picture's worth 1,000 words. So I went back and looked at the photo set and thought, do I have another view of that same area? So looking at we were looking at this picture on the title slide, and a little bit further south. Now, admittedly, I have not had time to verify this, but that looks like modular housing to me. Maybe my fellow experts on the call can confirm that later. But as I was looking into it, I was like, wow, that looks like some modular units. And then we're gonna looking further, kind of expanding that view again. This is that neighborhood in question. And then looking at the aerial photos, you can't see it here, but looking at the aerial photos in the mature forested area here, there's actually a manufactured home park there. And so, like I said, I thought it would be fun to start with looking at these pictures because it really further illustrated the fact that, 2 years ago, I personally wasn't thinking about the manufactured housing piece being a part of the housing picture, but was pleasantly surprised to see that, at least in Smyrna, we have a really good mix of housing in this particular area where we have, apartments, townhomes, single family homes, manufactured homes, and really getting into the goals of the webinar today. I thought it was just an interesting exercise to go through for me, just looking at really how manufactured and modular, which we're going to get into, how manufactured and modular housing can contribute to affordable housing production. Really, underlining production because, as our speakers are going to demonstrate today, we do have a shortage of houses, and we really need to get some more units on the ground. So you're going to hear from me as an overview, because my job is really just to provide a brief overview of our webinar, provide some perspective from the Delaware chapter of APA, and then I'm going to moderate the webinar. But I really want to focus on our 3 speakers today from Delaware and Maryland to give you that perspective. Some of the other goals, we are going to talk about the difference between manufactured and modular housing and the role that each of them can play in increasing affordable housing. We also want to discuss the current housing needs in the Mid-Atlantic through our speakers and look at manufactured housing's kind of current role and the future role. And then I really hope that we can focus a lot of our energy today on actionable solutions that can really get at producing some near-term results. As you'll see from our content today, there is a need. So I'm sure you can find a lot of different definitions depending on where you look, but I thought Rocket Mortgage had a nice kind of succinct way of doing it, and I also know that some of my fellow speakers are going to get into it more. So just at a really high level, manufactured home, I've highlighted there, really has to do with the HUD code and kind of a standardized code. And then you can see there, built in a factory, both, but it has to do with the foundation and whether it's also, kind of a permanent foundation or a temporary foundation. And then a modular home, has stricter standards, must comply with all local building codes and standards. So like I said, and you will have all these slides, but kind of an interesting exercise to dig into the different definitions, but they all kind of center around, similar definition, which I thought Rocket Mortgage did an okay job defining that. But like I said, I'm gonna let my fellow speakers dive into that a little bit more. So, so a little bit of perspective from Delaware to start. This is from our 2024 annual report on state planning issues, and this chart is actually derived from 2023 housing needs assessment. And what you'll see, what I immediately gravitate towards is you see we have 24,400 new residential units needed by 2030 just to meet the expected growth. And then down here, there's lots of different income standards you can apply, but we used, or the housing needs assessment used 100% of area median income. And the need is we need over half of these builds to be affordable for households below that level. And that, doing that math, equated to 12,723 residential units needed. And for a small state like Delaware, that's an average of 1,200 new units per year, just of the affordable stuff. So once again, you can dive into these numbers, but that's just sort of a high level view of just the need. And I know we're going to get into that for Maryland as well. So just further illustrating that need, you're going to hear from all speakers across the country talk about the nationwide housing shortage and affordability crisis. And as I said, we're really hoping today to talk about how manufactured modular housing can be a part of that solution. Some quick notes from Freddie Mac's website. Good stuff there, and the links on the screen. But good stuff there. You can quote them as saying manufactured homes cost 45% less per square foot than site-built homes. That's a pretty big number, at least in my opinion. And then also another thing I found there was that they say more than 22 million families are homeowners because of manufactured housing, and they otherwise wouldn't be. So this is something we need to keep in mind when we're looking at our future supply. So I'm gonna go real quick through this, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that a little bit more than a year ago, I guess now, the Delaware APA led the Delaware Housing Supply Accelerator. And that was an effort to bring together stakeholders throughout the state, and that culminated in a report that you can get via the link on the slide, and we can also send that out through chat as well. But that report had some key takeaways, and I wanted to show these because you can see that the key takeaways are really, really are applicable to manufactured housing challenges and opportunities. This was an effort in partnership with the City Management Association of Delaware. And really, you can see, just going through these quickly, you can see the first takeaway was that more density by right is needed, that a lot of projects are stopped by community opposition. Really, for anything that's sort of not a single family home is different than the existing community character, so that sometimes creates problems. There are too many barriers for non-single family housing production in state regulations and local ordinances. Many local zoning codes have not been updated in decades, which is the case a lot across the country, so we'll probably get into that a little bit too. And then really, the overall feeling was that there probably are some incentives we can use that wouldn't require a great deal of funding and could really help move the needle. So the last thing I wanted to share was the way we framed this report was looking at actions that we could do as a state that would remove barriers and also create incentives at the same time, really kind of trying to find a balance between that state regulation and local control, so that they can be actionable but not too prescriptive. So the last thing I want to share, and I'm doing this because I really hope that it helps frame our discussion. In that report, we used a format where we proposed actions at the state and local level, and then the categories were enable and incentivize. Enable meaning how can we remove barriers, make the regulatory environment better, and how can we incentivize, provide real methods of increasing opportunities. So, like I said, I think a lot of these, apply to our conversation today. So I wanted to set that up, and I'm hoping as we talk, we can keep that both sides of that, both factors in play here. How do we enable and how do we incentivize? So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to our series of speakers. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, but you can see we're gonna have Robert Tunnell today, and Matthew Kraeuter. They're going to be speaking from Delaware perspective, and then we have Carter Reitman, who's going to be speaking from Maryland's perspective. So, and then we'll come together at the end for a Q&A and discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Robert now, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Sorry, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully, I think I got my slides set up, and hopefully everybody can hear me. So my name is Robert Tunnell III. For this presentation, um, I am a member of the First State Manufactured Housing Association. So we're an industry and trade association. I represented the association on the last year's Delaware. I was on the Manufactured Housing Subcommittee for the Affordable Housing Task Force for the state of Delaware, representing the association. And a little bit on my background. I'm the managing member of Tunnell Companies. So we are a fourth generation real estate development company located in Long Neck, Delaware. Our main focus is land lease development and management of land lease communities. So right now we have about 3,600 home sites that are built in the Long Neck area. We're permitted for maybe another 1,500 home sites on top of that. And really our communities are in the kind of the coastal area just west of Rehoboth Beach. So we have boat slips. We have an 18-hole golf course as part of the community. So when we start talking about Delaware, there's a lot of there's a kind of a number of different types of manufactured housing communities. Some that are resort-like, that are second homes, which are where our communities are focused. And then there's other blue-collar, year-round communities in Western Sussex, a retiree kind of focus in Kent County, and then kind of more of a blue-collar year-round residents that live in Newcastle County. So the pictures on this slide at the bottom, one is kind of a close-up of our Potnet's Bayside community, showing kind of the boat slips and the coastal aspect of the communities. And then I included the picture next to us to show us that we've come a long way in our house design. That's a home from about the late, maybe 1978, 1977, moving into the communities. So just take note of this photo with the wide load sign on it. The home is metal siding, metal roof. It's a single wide. And then as we go through the presentation, we'll compare kind of that design to where we are currently. Oops, go through, sorry. So a manufactured house is built to the National HUD Code standard. Modular homes are built to a local or regional or state-specific building code. So for instance, everything we use in all our communities are manufactured homes. So it's the national standard. So the homes that are brought into our communities in Delaware, they have the same wind load and specifics for how you're allowed to install solar panels on a house, et cetera, energy efficiency ratings and everything. So it's a national standard. So if you have a house that's brought into a community in Florida or in Michigan, you have the same set of building standards that are across the country. And then below that, I've included some other very specific differences. Foundations. The house in the picture you have here is being set on piers. And you'll notice this one's actually a triple wide. So it comes in 3 sections that are then pieced together and enclosed under roof on the lot. So a modular home usually is on a permanent foundation, and it's anything from a regular kind of something that looks like a site-built house down to what Matt built, which would be more considered park models or smaller types of homes that he'll get into. So in addition, there's a lot of zoning differences. The manufactured housing communities we can only put manufactured homes in there. We can have any other type of housing. And it's usually that way with a modular home. You can't then backfill with a HUD code manufactured home. And then there's also a lot of differences in financing. On the manufactured home side, they're treated as chattel, financed as personal property. A modular home can be, depending, on the setup, would then be, you have access to traditional financing. So those are some of the difference between a manufactured and a modular house. So these are some pictures of some new manufactured homes. Just to note, historically, there's really been a very negative connotation with a manufactured house or a trailer park, et cetera. And they're really everything when you're inside a house, you can't tell the difference. It's granite and engineered stone countertops, the cabinetry. It could be anything that's installed by the factory to custom cabinets, vinyl flooring, all the different features of a traditional house. All these homes that you see here have 9-foot ceilings, drywall inside, etc. So really, when you're looking at quality, there really is no difference. You can create the same quality of a manufactured home in this factory environment. So specifically in Delaware, there's about 24,000 home sites on land lease communities in Delaware, primarily concentrated in the beach area in Sussex County, Newcastle County, and then the Dover-Smyrna area. The demographics of the people that live in those homes vary widely from a higher end second home to kind of a blue collar type community. What's interesting in Delaware, no new manufactured home communities have been built since 1992. And the shipments in homes since the late 90s have declined. The statistic from 1998, about 1,470 new homes were shipped into Delaware. Last year, 296, so a dramatic decrease. And since 2010, we've had about a 6,800 home site reduction in the state due to communities closing. So the manufactured housing market in Delaware is pretty stagnant. Again, no new communities built since the early 90s, shipments down going into the state, and we're actually seeing some community closures. So what can we do to turn that around? So Delaware, over the past year and a half or so, put together an affordable housing task force that focused not only on manufactured housing, but all types of housing in the state. Our subcommittee just on manufactured housing met 6 times, and we put together a number of recommendations to the state and to our legislators. So Matt also served on this committee. So I think I'm going to focus on some of kind of the policy and the developer side of things and let him deal with kind of the housing and the kind of his focus on the construction side. So we broke the recommendations up into a number of different buckets. One of which that we really got into, but it wasn't so much as a focus on the production task force, was kind of what types of services or help or things we could do legislatively that would help current or existing residents, not just what would then kind of increase the housing supply. So some of the features we looked at for current homeowners were ways to get them better connected to wraparound services, whether it was help with food or heating, different subsidies, et cetera. There's no real in Delaware, no real single point of clearinghouse kind of for all that stuff. Trying to create that. We were also looking at how we could tackle the issue of the chattel versus real property and bring financing costs down and have manufactured homes be considered real property and just not chattel. We've looked at different types of grants for home improvements, how you can help somebody fix up their house and stay in the house. One of the biggest things that came out of this through the task force, and we met with a number of different state and federal departments, was tie downs. So on a home, maybe until the mid to late 80s, they were not required to have hurricane straps or tie downs. So if there was a storm, these straps would actually help keep the home in place, and sitting on those piers that we saw in one of the previous slides. So what we found out through this task force is if your house does not have tie downs, if it was built prior to that, and there was ever a federal disaster, unless it had tie downs, you weren't available for the FEMA disaster relief money. So we've been looking at a legislation to create a program for grants for the tie downs, so that if there ever was an issue, that would, an issue where we had a FEMA kind of disaster, at least that way that would be one less loophole to jump through for homeowners to be eligible. And then down under, we looked at some education classes for community management, a requirement of essential services within communities. And then one of the things I think why, on the previous slide, why we've had the reduction in the number of lots is Delaware is under a statewide rent control. And there's some kind of ongoing issues with the code where we're under one calculation formula now, but there's some sunsetting of it. So there's kind of a big unknown after 2026, how rent increases will be calculated. So it's kind of got a chilling effect on the, nobody's really putting any money into developing any new communities, because of the kind of big unknown in the rent control in the legislature. We looked at a lot of different ways to streamline zoning of communities. Can we waive certain things like traffic impact studies, or for Newcastle County, the voluntary school assessment, if portions of new communities were able to contain affordable housing components. And then just as an overall industry, we looked at better ways to connect our legislative and homeowners and community owners together to kind of work through some of these issues. And then we're looking at ways to put together, or at least some kind of study on public and private partnerships on communities. One of the things I think we saw through the process is there could definitely be some updating of codes. There's the section for manufactured housing communities that allows co-ops is really outdated, and it's not even really feasible in the state currently. So there's a number of legislative things that we can do. Over the past year, since the task force has concluded, we have looked at a number of legislative changes for issues that came out of the task force. There's been a whole revamping of the lease transfer process in communities. There was a receivership change that was allowed, that was suggested coming out of the community, or out of the task force. And there were a number of changes to, there's a relocation trust fund in Delaware. So that's a public group that community owners and homeowners pay money into a fund that when a community does close, that the community can go and apply to this fund to then get reimbursed for the moving costs to move a house into a different community. So there were a bunch of changes to that. And then there were some changes to the installation board. So nothing really over the past year in the recent legislative changes have kind of done a wholesale dive into revamping zoning or any of the regulatory kind of framework around manufactured housing in the state. But I think there's definitely a number of things that we need to do as far as updating zoning to allow manufactured housing, not only as a new form of housing, but also allowing these homes to be used as backfill in a community. If it was a vacant lot in a community, that if we could backfill it with a manufactured home that is cheaper on a per square foot basis, it makes a lot more sense than having to build something that costs more. So again, there's also some changes to the rent justification code in the state of Delaware that would provide clarity to future rent increases, and then hopefully would start some investment in new communities. And again, there's a number of zoning updates in placement code of homes. There's antiquated code in Sussex County where we operate, where there's Not only is there setbacks from lots, there's separation distance from other homes and structures on other lots. There's lot coverage ratios, they're antiquated. There's no real standardized setbacks between communities. So there's a number of code changes that I think would be relatively easy to make that could streamline placement of homes in existing communities, as well as some zoning changes that could hopefully fast track some new communities being built. And really all these kind of have to happen together because they all kind of impact each other, whether it's code changes, rent control changes, or zoning changes moving forward. So I think that's all I had in my presentation. I can pass it on to Matt now.
Hey, thanks, Robbie. I appreciate it. Let's see, can you give me a thumbs up if we can see that presentation? All right, thanks, Carter. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Matthew Kraeuter with Great Outdoor Cottages. Just a little bit of quick information about who I am and who we are as a company. The company itself, Great Outdoor Cottages, is based in Southern Delaware. We are a manufacturing company. We manufacture park model homes. We manufacture modular homes. We manufacture houseboats and a variety of different codes and other different building requirements. So we're going to focus mostly on the modular housing piece here today. My background, I was a practicing attorney for many years for a manufacturing company, and I come from a general counsel background. So working through development codes and local zoning codes has been something I've done for quite some time, and something we've confronted quite a bit in this new role. So we'll jump in here real quick and discuss the current situation, which I think we've covered in a decent bit. I know that Josh spoke a bit about the Delaware piece, and Carter is going to talk about Maryland. I kind of split the baby a little bit there. I live in the state of Maryland. I've lived there for many years, but the company is actually based in Delaware. And besides putting numbers on the problem, I'll just give a practical kind of scenario of what happened to me just a couple weeks ago. You know, we employ about 115 people here in Southern Delaware. And I had one gentleman come to my office a couple weeks back, and he's commuting from New Jersey. It's nearly 2 hours away to come down here and work with us, which we are very thankful of. He's a fantastic worker and a great human being. And he came to my office and he said, "Hey, Matt, you know, I see these houses every day and we build them every day. Can I buy one?" And I said, "Of course you can. And, you know, we'll do whatever we can to, you know, make that happen." And then he asked the difficult question, which was, where can I put it? And that's really where we're confronted with the biggest problem. You know, we can build as much as people want out of this factory. We can build 2 or 3 or 4 a day, depending on what the needs are. But the problem is, where do you put them? And that's really where the planners and you guys are going to come into play here, is helping to address that issue. All right, so we can actually build the product the same with Robert's what he does as well. He can order as many homes as he wants. It's a matter of where do you put them. And so that's kind of one of the biggest challenges. But you know, obviously there's a supply shortage in Maryland. I believe the number is 125,000 housing units short. And I think in Delaware it was 25,000. So, you know, it's a large scale problem, and it doesn't matter whether you ask the question in Prince George's County, Maryland, or whether you ask the question in Sussex County, Delaware, or in Boise, Idaho. You'll get the same answer, that there's a dramatic shortage of housing in general, and even more problematic is affordable housing. Trying to find houses that land in that range where people can actually afford to buy them. And just kind of definitionally, we tend to think of affordability as between 80 and 120% of the area median income. And just with hard dollars, when we're working on a development project, we try to look for a sub $2,000 payment. That's kind of our goal in terms of quote affordability. We just wanted to put a little definition around that. Obviously, increased cost is a challenge that everybody's seeing. There's not only increased cost, but cost uncertainty right now. Labor, we're actually blessed in our company here. We have a fantastic workforce that is very dedicated and does a great job. We've been very blessed in that front. On the material side, it's very challenging, and again, on the interest side, that's created additional expense for us as well. Zoning, land use, and regulatory challenges, that's what we're all here for. That's what's, the where can we put these houses issue. And then lastly, political and social resistance. I think Robert touched on it briefly, the kind of stigma around manufactured housing. And I think that also bleeds over to modular housing. And then even more so when you start talking about affordable housing, people have a bad perception of what affordable housing means. And I think that's part of what our politicians and what we need to do as a community to kind of remove that stigma of affordable housing and it being a good thing, because it is. We've touched, I'm not going to revisit the manufactured versus modular. I did see a comment or a question in the notes there about Maryland and where you can put manufactured housing, and 2 sessions ago, I guess Maryland passed and the governor signed the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act. And that allowed for manufactured housing to be put on residentially zoned lots. We're still kind of waiting to see how that comes out in the end, because there are some, restrictions that local jurisdictions can still put around those manufactured houses in terms of aesthetics and other design standards. And we'll see how that really works out, but it was definitely a step in the right direction. And modular housing is what I'm going to talk about a bit here today, and that's built under the International Residential Code as that's adopted by each state. So each state is different. And just by way of example, the state of North Carolina requires a majority roof pitch of 5 by 12. It's just an old rule, but it's part of the rules and it's specific to that state. So we have to comply with that based on each state. GOC is a company. We built houses in modular houses in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina and Tennessee is where we build and ship. Other products we ship from Maine down to Key West and even into Puerto Rico. We've got a couple good number of houses going by boat over there. So the challenge with modular housing is that it's efficient in its construction, but it's very difficult in its compliance, in that we need, and it is built just like a regular stick-built house. So I need a full set of engineered drawings. I need inspections as it's being built, and I need inspections on site, very similar to a stick-built house. But let's talk a little bit about the benefits of modular housing. And I do want to take a step back and talk a little bit about definitions again. That we get questions all the time. We build a lot of houses in the 400, 500, and 600 square foot range, which a lot of people would call a tiny home. But tiny is again not a very defined term. So we like to look at it as simplified living. People are looking for affordability and looking for something that's affordable. So we kind of look at things that way and not really in the tiny home realm. But obviously the benefits of modular housing is velocity. It's speed with purpose, right? We can do things quickly here. At our factory, we have a house comes in one end of the assembly line and it will come out about 7 days later, ready built, with appliances and ready to go. So you're talking about days and not weeks and months and even years of construction. From the time that we get the approval, we can move out, build the house, the site work can be done, and then we can set the house. And our target goal is about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks from when we get the okay to when we're setting a house on a foundation. Predictability is key. We really working with, when you're working on a stick-built house, you've got a lot of coordination among all the various contractors trying to get things done and built on time. We have a dedicated work staff, staff that shows up every day and works hard every day, and we know, with pretty good certainty what's going to be done that day. Obviously, cost control and predictability. We build things on an assembly line. It has its restrictions in terms of size and certain materials that we can use, but the efficiencies associated with building on an assembly line are tremendous. Reduce downtime. We build indoors. It does get a little warm in the summertime, but we don't get weather delays and rain delays and other delays related to third parties and other contractors. And then pricing, we're able to lock in pricing and get real-time pricing instead of trying to predict what pricing may be in the future. And especially nowadays, the pricing has become very variable. So that really helps when you're starting to model a development, that we can really lock in that pricing. Robert talked about a little bit, the available financing is really a big benefit to modular housing because it can be a conventional mortgage, an FHA mortgage, a VA mortgage. And then really the key on the speed and velocity front is that on a traditional construction loan, you're paying interest along the way. And at 6, 7, 8, 9%, it can be a tremendous cost. Whereas here we're talking about weeks. So that cost really gets pushed down. And the last piece I'll talk about is wealth creation. And what I mean by that is looking at houses that are affordable that people can buy. It's the first step to their creation of their own wealth. And they're paying off a mortgage for a home that they own, on the dirt that they own. And it can really be a step in the right direction. So that's our group and our partners that we work with really focus on that aspect, is to give people that first step towards that home ownership and that wealth creation. Let's talk about a little variety in modular housing. It's not just a single box or two boxes that are coming. It's really even today apartments are being built through modular construction because of the advantages associated with it. So we can do single family, quad, tri, duplexes, townhomes, single stories, multi-stories. We can build in a variety of different styles, a historic style, coastal, modern, farmhouse, whatever the town or neighborhood calls for, we can really modify that with, similar styles, inside, but really make the outside aesthetically pleasing. I will just make one quick note on the zoning front. We moved into multifamily on the townhomes because a lot of the affordable housing initiatives focus on density, and a good way to get density is to have homes together. So that really pushed us in the to look towards a variety of different options. So I'm just going to go through and give you a sense of what these homes look like, just to give you a sense of what's happening these days. This is our manufacturing facility in Georgetown, Delaware. We have 45,000 square feet with 25,000 additional in the back on about 11 acres. Like I said, we build 2 to 3 houses a day out of this factory. They come in boxes, so it does come in pieces, but they are, nearly finished in the factory. And then they're assembled in a matter of days on site. This is a good example of a project we're working on in Virginia, where you can really get a nice mix of townhomes, single families, duplexes, and spread it around so that you can have a nice variety of houses to choose from to meet the need for those neighborhoods. This is a 2-story house in kind of a little historic cottage type look. Here's a more modern style 2-story house. Single story, this is a Virginia project that we're doing. It's 2 bedroom, 1 bath. This is a duplex, it's a twin home, 2 houses put together. This is 5 townhomes in 1 row. So this is, the boxes come and they get stacked and set next to each other. So like I said, you can really get creative with what you're building and what styles you want to introduce into your planning. A couple of practical solutions that we've been working on with our local jurisdictions, and again, it does come down to a very local issue for a lot of folks to be able to push forward, and that's why I appreciate everybody here today. By right zoning is going to be one of the biggest ways to actually make improvements. I don't think there's many people around that will say that they don't want more affordable housing. It's just not true. We need it, and we need it for the people that work and live in our communities. So how do we make things happen? And by right zoning is a really effective tool to do that. It reduces delays, right? I like the quote, if it meets the code, it gets approved, right? You guys are able to write the code the way that you want it, and so long as the project meets that code, it can be approved. It does shield projects from some local opposition. It's just the nature of what we do. And again, we had talked earlier about some of the NIMBYism and the stigma associated with, I'll call it, affordable housing and these type projects, and it gives you some protection there. Development costs, it certainly lowers those. As a former lawyer, I take a little offense to my comment about fewer lawyers because lawyers have to eat too. But fewer lawyers, fewer experts and engineers, revisions and appeals. You can follow the rules with how the by right zoning is written, and you can move forward with your project. Avoids arbitrary local control. There is some local control and favoritism that happens in this world, and you can get away from that with by right zoning, and encourages outside development. If you're a jurisdiction that helps people get things approved and helps projects move forward instead of being roadblocks, that's really going to encourage that outside development. I'll give just a brief example. Georgetown, Delaware, our small little town, it's the county seat of Sussex County in Delaware. They're actually moving forward with a zoning amendment to allow for smaller houses and smaller lot sizes to encourage workforce housing. And I spoke with the planning commission, I guess about 2 weeks back, and really had to applaud them for being thought leaders in this area. The folks that gave the presentation supporting the amendment gave 2 examples. One was in Washington State and one was in Colorado. And it really is telling that there's nothing around here that's comparable to what they're trying to do, which is really kind of a cottage community or a smaller, house community with different zoning. And so Georgetown, in Southern Delaware really took a step forward and is leaning into this, and it's on its way to approval here. And there's already 2 projects that are funded and ready to go that once this zoning ordinance is passed, they're going to move out. And I believe that, showing people, hey, this is the steps that we went through. This is what we had to do. We got it done, and here's the outcome. We've ended up with 220 additional houses in Sussex County that are in that affordable range. Streamlined permitting and approvals, fast tracking affordable modular mixed use housing, really trying to get some of that paperwork out of the way would obviously reduce cost and incentivize folks to come in. Pre-approved modular plans that meet building code and design standards is an interesting way to attack it, where the town or whichever local jurisdiction adopts a design style and says, okay, we're going to allow these type houses in our neighborhood, whether it's a historic neighborhood or a farm style neighborhood, however it is, to allow to do that. Obviously, expand financing options. Maryland has the Maryland Mortgage Program, which is a great program, and Carter may speak on this as well, but allows for down payment assistance to enable folks to get a traditional mortgage with a regular bank, and it's either a 0 interest loan for the down payment or a grant for the down payment. I would argue that it should be expanded. It's only in certain zones throughout the state, but I think expansion of that would be a great step in the right direction, and other states can look at that as a model as well. Incentivize affordability, density bonuses for workforce and affordable housing, waived impacts fees, tax abatements. In my county, in Worcester County, sewer connections right now are being auctioned off for above $50,000 a connection. And obviously when you haven't even, banged a single nail or put a shovel in the ground yet, and you're at $50,000, it really makes it difficult to build affordable housing in that mark that we're looking for. Lastly, workforce and community partnerships, working with hospitals, universities, and school systems and large employers to create that employer-assisted housing. We're doing that on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, where the county is having challenges recruiting teachers. And they've said, well, we need housing here that the teachers can afford. So they're actually modifying their zoning so that we can do that, and they're contributing land as well to make that happen. So, you know, it really is going to take some creativity on the political front. Just going to touch on a couple other points on what I'll call workforce housing. And it really is for your teachers, nurses, law enforcement, and the folks that live and work in our communities. And there's some really creative, some people have taken some creative steps to do these, where a local jurisdiction is going to incentivize or provide grants for to build affordable housing so that they can keep that cost down. But obviously, you need to prevent large buyers from coming in and buying them up and Airbnb-ing them or short-term rentals. So there's ownership restrictions, occupancy restrictions, which you have to live there, you can't rent it. Work location, people that work in the jurisdiction, and transfers, that if you were to sell it, you can't just buy and flip. It's really for the people that live and work in those communities. So there's some really creative ways, and we worked with the attorney for Habitat for Humanity to help us put those kind of guardrails around these neighborhoods, which has been really effective. And then the last piece is kind of a separate piece, but I'll just touch on it briefly, is the accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. And you know, this has been a really interesting topic, and I was able to participate in Maryland's ADU task force, which I believe resulted in the legislation that was just passed, which is requiring all of the Maryland counties to pass zoning rules on accessory dwelling units. And you know, it is a creative solution to allow a secondary structure on a property. And again, whether it's a garage apartment, an attached structure, or a detached structure, where some people refer to them as granny flats or in-law suites or any of those, just as you know, it's not going to solve the affordable housing crisis, but it's at least adding to the housing stock that we have. Some of the challenges associated with it are, you know, we still have to build, whether it's a 350 square foot accessory dwelling unit, it still has to comply with all of the state local building codes. So it's going to require those engineered drawings. It's going to require all of the inspections, all the fire code, and does make it a bit of a challenge to get there. And there is local zoning and political pushback, as we saw in that task force. But I think that's going to be resolved through the local jurisdictions there, to see how they each handle it for the needs of their jurisdiction. So with that, I will turn it over to Carter.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, great presentation. Matt touched on a lot of the stuff taking place in Maryland. I'm not going to speak to all of it today. There's a lot taking place here, but I do want to give some of the Maryland context for sure. So my name is Carter Reitman. I am the lead housing planner for the Maryland Department of Planning. I'm very pleased to give that Maryland perspective. Not only Matt, but also Josh describes some of the general need associated with housing right now and the advantages of manufactured housing. So I'm not going to retread that territory, but I would like to give some Maryland context because we're special. MDP contributed to a webinar earlier this year on housing affordability in the Mid-Atlantic, but since then the state released an updated housing needs assessment in collaboration with the Maryland National Center for Smart Growth, University of Maryland's National Center for Smart Growth. That assessment revealed some really sobering new data. First, the state needs an additional 590,000 units by 2045 to accommodate projected growth. That would mean nearly 30,000 units a year, but our state is permitting, and that's permitting, not completing, only about 17,000 units per year on average. And that average includes the big bump in multifamily unit production we all saw during the pandemic. I also want to note that this need is additional to the current housing shortage, which Matt noted earlier is over 100,000. We are quite simply not producing enough housing in Maryland, and we haven't really since the 2008 financial crisis. Second, as always, when you look at how the lower income half of the state lives, the picture becomes much more dire. To meet the current demand, and that's current, not future, the state needs an additional 275,000 rental units that are affordable for households earning 80% of area median income or below. These are people currently living in Maryland who are forced to pay more than a third and often over half of their incomes on housing, which of course means that they have little to no money left over for transportation, healthcare, food, what have you. And with the way we currently develop housing, it is not financially feasible generally for the private market to develop and still make a profit at this affordability level. So they won't do it without significant public subsidy. And to put that in perspective, with all the millions and millions of dollars that our federal government and the state pour into housing subsidy, Maryland's housing department produced just 1,806 deed restrictive affordable rental units last year. So those numbers in mind, 275,000 needed, 1,806 last year. Third, we, like much of the country, have a rapidly aging population. Older adults are projected to be 21% of the state's total population by 2040. And we know that older adults have distinctive housing needs. Many are on fixed incomes and need greater affordability. Older adults are also more likely to live alone, especially in the state's rural counties, and may therefore prefer smaller unit types. Most of us will also enter disability at some point in our lives, and older adults are much more likely to develop a disability. So the demand for units that are accessible, that have extensive accessibility features, is going to continue rising, and it's going to start rising faster. Those accessibility features are, of course, quite costly, and so they put affordability further out of reach for a segment of the population that needs it most desperately. We are already seeing the impact of this demographic shift and financial pressure. From 2018 to 2024, there was a 77% increase in adults aged 65 and older in Maryland facing homelessness. That's 77% increase. So yes, Maryland is in a housing crisis. It's urgent, it's enormous, and it is getting worse. So that's the condition that Maryland's in. I'm not going to describe the benefits or conditions of manufactured housing broadly across the country because my buddies on this presentation already did that, but I'll note that Maryland in particular is really not taking advantage of everything this type has to offer. Across the country, the vast majority of manufactured homes are, unsurprisingly, getting shipped to the states that are building the most housing. So Texas is number one with 18,000 units, no surprise there. When you look at the percentage of total new single-family homes, it's primarily the southern states with high percentages. So Mississippi leads on this. Over a third of the state's new single-family product is manufactured. And those numbers are pretty nutty when you compare with Maryland, which received just 204 manufactured housing shipments in 2024. And that represents only 1.8% of total new single-family homes in the state. At that percentage, that means Maryland ranks 48th in the nation for manufactured home shipments. And that sadly tracks, considering that Maryland is the least affordable in terms of housing when you compare it with all our neighboring states in the mid-Atlantic. All those states are, of course, also shipping in more total manufactured units. And for my Delaware friends, shout out, FYI, y'all rank 35th at about 5%. So still not great, but better than us. It's within that context that Maryland's General Assembly, which is our legislative body, has passed several bills that support manufactured housing development either directly or indirectly. I'd like to highlight three. That's HB 286, the Planning Principles Act, forwarded by us at MDP, HB 538, which Matt mentioned earlier, the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act, and HB 1466, the Accessory Dwelling Units or ADU bill. These all do great work, but as I've noted, the housing crisis here continues to accelerate. So we're really excited to see what our legislature cooks up in its 2026 session, which is in January. Starting with the 8 Sustainable Growth Planning Principles, we are big fans of manufactured housing and modular housing at MDP, and our support is not just because it's a best practice, which it is. On October 1, that's tomorrow, Maryland's 8 planning principles go into effect. These new principles guide Maryland's shift from smart growth to sustainable growth. And that's a more balanced way of managing land use and development. Sustainable growth means policies that fairly address economic, social, and environmental factors for both current and future generations. By law, local comprehensive plans are required to incorporate the principles, and Maryland state investments must be consistent with these principles. That's in our state finance and procurement article. Our principle for housing is to enable a mix of quality housing types, and affordability options to accommodate all who want to live in the state. Manufactured housing, of course, perfectly forwards that principle. Next up, HB 538 passed in 2024. This one was huge for Maryland, and not just for the manufactured bit. It's in the name. The law aims to make development of affordable housing easier across the state. The bill essentially mandates that local jurisdictions treat manufactured and modular homes just as they would site-built homes, sometimes called stick-built homes. The provision that got the most attention is the law's density bonus for qualified projects in particular regions across the state. And this component of the bill, by comparison, that is the manufactured housing component, didn't attract a whole lot of attention, and it doesn't even now, even though Matt is quite fond of it, of course. In preparation for this webinar, I went back and looked through all the testimony that the bill got and saw that very few people actually even mentioned this component. Despite that, I think in the long term, this may be the most meaningful aspect of the bill. A modular dwelling is defined in the bill by HB 538, so I'm not going to elaborate too much here. State law also defines a manufactured home, but it's important to note, as our previous presenters have identified, that any manufactured home that has a HUD certification number and complies with federal safety standards meets the state's criteria. This provision of HB 538 only applies to manufactured homes that are converted to real property, that is to say, affixed permanently to a foundation on a property that is also owned by the same person or entity. So this law would not apply to mobile homes because they're not permanently affixed. In my opinion, that's a shame because the cost of moving mobile homes can be in the tens of thousands of dollars. They are effectively permanent as a result, if not legally permanent, but them's the breaks. A housing law researcher I spoke with out of Utah told me that Maryland is the first state in the nation to mandate manufactured and modular homes in single-family zones in this way. I don't know whether that's true, but I'd prefer to believe that it is because it makes Maryland more special. I'll continue repeating it until someone tells me otherwise, maybe someone on this webinar. Local jurisdictions can apply all the same requirements that they may apply to other houses. So that would mean your building code, your zoning code, or whatever. You just can't apply any special requirements that you wouldn't apply to other houses. So for instance, local governments are obliged to allow manufactured housing in their historic districts, just as they would any other kind of new construction. But those manufactured homes would have to meet all the same historic district requirements. ADUs. So we did a great webinar on ADUs in July. My boss, Joe Griffiths, did a phenomenal job summarizing ADUs and all the work that MDP has done on that, and Matt's contributions to the ADU task force. Thank you again, Matt. So I'm not going to retread that territory either. If you want to learn more about ADUs, definitely go queue up that webinar, and it's on YouTube. Have a grand old time. I strongly encourage it. For this webinar, I just want to note the opportunities at the intersection of Maryland's ADU policy and Maryland's manufactured housing policy. Of course, there are a ton of ADU types, some shown here, and not all of these can be manufactured. You can't put a manufactured ADU in your basement, I don't think. But manufactured and modular homes make perfect detached ADUs. HB 1466 makes ADU construction a bit easier in Maryland in a couple ways. First, it overrides restrictive covenants, including HOA bylaws, that impose unreasonable limitations on ADUs. So if your HOA tells you that you can't put an ADU on your property because it's manufactured, you can now tell them to take a flying leap at a donut, or once the law goes into effect. The bill also requires that local governments authorize ADUs on properties with an existing single-family detached dwelling unit. And now at MDP, we, of course, also love ADUs. So we're really stoked to see opportunities for manufactured homes and ADUs to go together. Here's one example of synergy between ADUs and manufactured homes that we've already identified that's very particular to Maryland. And it's sprinklers. Some people, their eyes glaze over when I start talking about sprinklers. They think it's complicated. I would encourage you not to let your eyes glaze over. It's very interesting. It's very important. Some jurisdictions have approached our department, MDP, saying, we love ADUs. We want to construct more ADUs. We're happy with them being manufactured, but we have a fire sprinkler problem. To be specific, Maryland passed a law last decade saying that all new single-family unit construction needs to have sprinklers. California has the same law, and California and Maryland are the only two states in the nation that require sprinklers on new single-family. That would apply to ADUs as well, of course. Here's the problem, though. The water service lines going to individual houses in our historic urban cores were installed underground, of course, many decades ago. These service lines and water meters that go to these houses will frequently have a 3/4 inch diameter, and that's insufficient to install a fire suppression sprinkler system, which will more frequently need an inch diameter. So to add an ADU with sprinklers, a meter upgrade or a service line upgrade may be necessary. And that's in order to comply with state law. A meter upgrade can cost thousands of dollars. And if you need to excavate for a service line upgrade, that can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And both those costs would immensely increase the cost of development, and then your affordability really goes out the window. And so even worse, those costs may dissuade a lot of homeowners from adding an ADU at all when they otherwise would have. And so your ADU policy becomes unworkable, and the manufactured housing aspect becomes unworkable too. Recognizing this problem, I will note that the state of California, which has the same sprinkler requirement for new construction, exempted ADUs from that sprinkler requirement. But that relief just doesn't exist for Maryland homeowners, not yet. In Maryland, our Attorney General put out an opinion in 2022 saying that state law does not require installation of fire sprinklers in manufactured homes. The AG said back then that either Maryland's legislature or our Department of Labor could impose a fire sprinkler requirement on manufactured homes specifically, but both have declined to do so. Local governments, of course, retain their authority to impose a sprinkler requirement on those manufactured homes, and some have done so. So local governments across Maryland, therefore, find themselves at this intersection of really complicated regulations where they need to decide how to navigate that complexity. And once they figure out that regulatory complexity, they then have a political problem where they have to weigh fire safety against housing affordability. Of course, the best solution to this problem would be a subsidy program for these houses that need retrofitting, but Maryland is simultaneously in a budget crisis. So when confronted with these big political problems, these sticky wickets, and really limited, scarce resources, governments at all levels will prefer to ignore the problem altogether, right? In order to avoid a potentially politically troublesome scenario. But I do want to say that even though it's a truism at this point, we are living the consequences of the status quo, which is that Marylanders can't afford to stay in Maryland and our economy is stagnating. We have to build more housing faster and cheaper, either through increasing subsidy or decreasing development costs, as Josh already identified. In the case of manufactured housing and ADUs, that means either funding their construction or removing regulations that make them more costly or impossible to build. I know in my bones that that's true, but I'm also talking to local planning directors where they're telling me that they plan to impose restrictions on ADUs so that they will essentially be required to be stick built. And that really hamstrings the whole thing. And I would urge them, and I'm urging all of you to think about this a little more comprehensively and holistically. It is a sticky wicket. It is a sticky political scenario, and no one wants to confront that. But The moment is tremendously urgent. We have a Secretary of Housing and a Secretary of Planning and a governor that recognize the urgency of the moment. And so I hope you'll join with them in that feeling of urgency. And I'll stop there, thanking you for your attention. And I think we can now move on to Q&A.
Thank you, Carter. Wow, 1 minute early. We did a great job staying on time. So thank you to all of you. I'm going to bring the other speakers back on. First of all, thank you, gentlemen, for the great information. Very much appreciated. Hopefully, everyone is learned a lot today. And thank you, Jillian, too, for managing things. Thank you, APA Virginia, for managing the webinar so far. Definitely don't want to forget you there. So we built in 20 minutes here for Q&A. I'm very, very encouraged to see that I've even answered a bunch of them, but there's 57 questions in the Q&A box. And I do know, so I guess what I'm going to ask is for my fellow speakers to maybe help me scan that Q&A box. And if there's things that you can answer, maybe specifically to you, go ahead and answer them. I went through and made some notes on questions that were kind of similar to each other, so I can kind of ask them in maybe batches. So I'll do that. I'll do that first, and then after I ask a couple of those, Jillian, I don't know if you did anybody want to speak to answer questions?
It doesn't appear so. I think it was just a mistake.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm gonna start off, and to all of our attendees out there, it's a lot of questions, and that's wonderful. I'm gonna try to tackle them in batches to try to answer as many questions as we can. And of course, if we are unable to answer your question, if we're unable to get to it, you can certainly contact us later. So there's some questions in the Q&A box regarding just kind of challenges related to land acquisition and the entire land lease community model. So I don't know, maybe Matt or Robert, if you could provide some insight on, just some of the pitfalls of that model, because there was also a question related to, if we are able to develop a new community, what happens? How do you protect residents once they're moved in and settled? Because obviously there might be development pressure, and the landowner may decide to sell. So yeah. Anyway, I'm trying to cover a lot there, so I don't know if you have any insight in just the land lease community model.
Yeah, so on the land lease side of things, so one thing that does make Delaware, I think we were the first in the country, and it was probably 15 or 18 years ago, kind of in the last crazy kind of economic run up in the early 2000s, there were a number of communities that were sold. And in response to that, we created kind of a whole department in the state where both community owners and homeowners pay into it. It's like $1.50 a month per lot for homeowners and $1.50 for community owners. And it's called the Delaware Relocation Trust Authority. So then if a community is sold, the state took the approach that they would create a fund that would then help homeowners move their homes into other communities if one was to close. So really that's what that model does. I think you get I think it's for a single wide, it's like $6,000 or $7,000 and 12 or 14 for a double wide that they pay to a mover to move a home and reset it up in a different community. So that's one piece of legislation that's kind of like a good safety net in land lease communities in the state of Delaware, where if they do close, and they've closed for a number of reasons, whether they're being redeveloped in a coastal area into kind of a more expensive version of housing, or we've had some close that were turned over into mini storage and other types of commercial and things like that. Because that's one of the issues is, in the state of Delaware with rent control. So the state has current laws that limit the amount of rent or what you can increase rent every year. That's really kind of stopped any kind of growth in the industry in the state. There's no outside entities coming into the state to develop any communities under the current rent control scheme. But I would encourage people to look at down the road is look at that whole relocation trust authority model to help communities and people if they do close.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, we also did have a lot of questions just about any more insight into why communities close. You touched on the fact that just the financial aspect of it, being the landowner, is it safe to say that maybe it's just less financially viable because of the rent control in place? And I guess I'm asking asking for a Maryland perspective too. Is it a similar thing in Maryland?
No, it's definitely, I think, more so in Delaware because that's one of the main issues is you do have communities closed because it's kind of, financially you can get a better return doing something else with it. So in like that picture you originally put up at the beginning of the slide where you were in Smyrna. So in our area, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, that's kind of what it looked like. It was a mixture of farm fields and other types of housing and manufactured homes. But as things get developed, it makes more sense to close and redevelop a community financially than it does to keep upgrading it. Given both, when you combine the development costs currently with kind of what you can get a return on through the land lease model. So yeah, so that the current rent justification or rent control model in Delaware is definitely prohibiting any kind of future growth in the industry and actually causing some definite closures of communities.
Carter, do you know, is there a similar issue in Maryland? Do you know? You have any insight from across the border?
There are countywide rent control laws, but we don't have a statewide rent control requirement for manufactured housing communities or anything like that. We do have communities closing occasionally, as Robert noted, but as I think Josh, as you acknowledged in the lead up to question, that's broadly just a result of various economic pressures and new investment players in the space.
Okay, great, thank you. I guess anyone can tackle this one. There's a lot of questions in the Q&A box just about the cost per square foot that I had shown from Freddie Mac and just in general, talking about maybe there's been increases in the last couple years. Can one of you talk just about the cost per square foot and maybe just the kind of the cost difference between manufactured modular versus stick built? Because I know there was also a related type of question just about kind of like, if you already own a piece of land and you want to use it as infill, are those costs, how do they compare? Matt, I see you speaking, but I can't hear you.
Let's try that one. Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, Robert, I don't know if you want to speak on what you're seeing price wise on the manufactured side. The modular side, compared to a stick built home, and as I hate to use this answer, but it varies wildly, depending on your fits and finish, and that's really going to drive a lot of your costs. But generally, you're looking at cost savings on the modular side, all in, to make it more affordable. But as I discussed before, it's really about the speed and the ability to do things quickly so that you're not carrying interest and paying people and paying 7, 8, 9% interest on a construction loan while you're building, and being able to act quickly. So, I would say it's generally you're looking at a 10 or 15 to 20% reduction in your construction costs when you're talking about modular housing. And I will say I saw a couple comments in there about, what are about the being able to build inside. And there definitely is something to be said about having your walls in a jig, essentially. So it's square all the time. You're not dealing with wet materials. It's a very controlled environment. So from a quality perspective, you really can, step up your game there. So Robert, I don't know if you want to touch on what you're seeing price wise on the manufactured side.
Yeah, so I probably on the manufactured side, and we are a little different because we are like on the manufactured home side of things, you can get You can get there's some giant national builders that'll build you a home that is probably watertight, maybe. And then there's some other higher end builders. But for what we usually bring in, a lot of our homes aren't 100% finished when we bring them in. Like we do kitchens and things like that on site, which are probably a little bit different than most. But we're still in that just kind of for the shell without all the finishes. I mean, we're still in that, we're below $100 a square foot. I mean, we're probably in that 75, 85 range. And then we end up finishing a bunch of stuff on site. So, you could probably go to a giant national builder that does a lot of volume and get down to that number that I think you were at 55 a square foot. But, you're probably not getting drywall and things like that for that price.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions related to, I guess, what I'm calling just design and construction. There was I'm trying to go in order as much as I can here. There was a question just about design variation in a community. And I think Matt's slides showed some good examples of how you can have some design variation while still having like modular components. We'll try to lump this together. Can you please provide some more information just about kind of how you can vary design in a community? And then also, we touched on quality control, but how does energy efficiency compare, soundproofing, things like that, versus a traditional stick built?
Sure. On the variation side, we posted a couple of the different pictures and looks. But when we design things, it has to be manufacturable, which it's kind of a broad term, but it's got to move down the line, right? So it has to be manufacturable. So we think about it as Lego pieces. So we're building the boxes, giant rectangles essentially that are going down that are going to be placed on site. And generally the insides don't vary as much as the outsides, because you can really change the look and style and feel of a house depending on roof pitch and dormers and porches and other things that really give it more of a modern style look or a traditional historic type look. And so, we try to keep we call it the main box itself is going to be very similar, but the exterior looks can vary quite a bit. And again, depending on whether you're building townhomes or duplexes, it really can kind of shake up that look and feel of a community.
Yeah, I would argue, Matt, just to illustrate that point, that's really not that different than stick-built homes. I mean, I live in a pretty typical subdivision, in Kent County, Delaware, and it's the same thing. Meaning, like my house, there's several examples of my exact house all around the neighborhood, but just variations on the outside, right?
Sure.
So you sort of figure there's some similarities there. Maybe not as different as we might think.
The phrase we always use is that it's customizable, it's not custom. So you can change it to get your feel right with colors and other options, but it's not a fully custom house. I tell folks if that's what they want, they should just go do that because it's not, like I said before, manufacturable.
I own a row home in Baltimore City. It was built in 1920. I didn't get to decide what it looked like. I'm okay with that. I think most people are okay with that if they can afford it.
Very good point. There was a question also along with design. Are there any advantages to using modular or manufactured homes in flood-prone areas? Excuse me. Meaning, like, obviously, if there's, I think Robert showed an example of building them on piers, and if we were to do that, could it make replacement costs a little bit less if there's damage? So yeah, I thought that was an interesting question just about.
I guess the practical example I could give is in Ocean City, building a home. New construction there needs to be, I think it's 9 feet above grade, and we build on regular wall foundations. We can do helical piles. We're pretty agnostic in terms of how we can do that. So whether you're putting it like Robbie showed the picture of it, 3 feet off the ground, or whether it's 10 feet off the ground, it really is somewhat irrelevant. So it makes it a little bit simpler because you're craning it into place anyway. It's a matter of craning it onto a 10-foot platform or a 2 or 3 foot platform. So in that sense, I would say it's easier. In the sense of it being mobile, I'll let Robert talk about the mobility of manufactured housing, but the modular homes are built and they're not intended to ever move. They are transported by truck, but once they're affixed to a foundation, it is not intended to move. So from that perspective, it really doesn't provide any advantages there.
Yeah, and I mean, in a flood zone, I mean, any HUD code manufactured home is going to be set on those concrete block piers that are actually filled with rebar and concrete, so they're actually solid piers. And it really makes no difference. You could put it on a solid foundation, piers with skirting that break away. So I mean, there's codes that you have to meet to put any kind of home in a flood zone, and really the type of foundation and the type of house, it's not going to matter. In those locations. So,
In terms of
Yeah, there was,
please.
sorry, go ahead, Carter.
I was just going to say, in terms of resilience, I was thinking not just in terms of the individual home, but also in terms of the type and the community overall, right? Like a community can be more resilient if there's an increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather events that are going to negatively impact these homes. If they can be rebuilt faster at a lower cost, then that does make the community more resilient, whether that be a manufactured home, a modular home, or even a 3D printed home.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a theme in the questions too, just about, why are we making a distinction between stick built and modular? And I think part of that is perception too. There's this perception that like, oh, a stick built house is better. And there are potentially cases like quality control, build quality, where maybe that's actually not the case. I think part of the questions that I'm seeing in the box are related to, how they perform in extreme weather, wind situation, things like that. So it sounds like there's been a lot of advancements in construction and design that make that less of an issue than it used to be. Is that correct?
Robert, do you want to touch on, is there variations in the HUD code based on wind zone?
No, it's one standard for everything, and I'm not 100% sure what that is, but I do know like all the houses coming here they meet this whatever the HUD hurricane guidelines are, and if you ship it into Kansas, it's the same set of guidelines. So there, any kind of weather event, whether it be snow load or wind, resistance and things like that, they meet them all. Yeah. So.
And from the modular side, because we need engineered drawings and it has to be approved by the local jurisdiction, we have to abide by that. So obviously on the, along the ocean in North Carolina, they have a substantially different wind zone requirement than something that might be in the DC metro area.
Yeah, there's some questions too, just about, why are we talking about manufactured housing, which could be lower density, when really, density is kind of what also helps affordability. And I think that comes down to a lot of things. There's always going to be a place for that more urban area where you have the need for, apartments, condos, higher density units. But when you're out in a more suburban area where you don't have the infrastructure to support such high density, you could still have these manufactured units in place of the traditional single family homes where you have lower cost. But I also do like Matt's examples where you can have townhomes and sort of like that mid-level density where you're going to get that affordability.
I feel like this would be, as far as a community design, like 3.5 units to the acre is very comfortable and still feels very residential and not overcrowded. So that's kind of that 3.5 is a good sweet spot. Like you can go less than that, it's going to feel nice. But anything kind of more than that 3.5 is going to feel pretty crowded. So I think you're right. It's kind of that mid-tier kind of type of product. Yeah, you're going to get much more density with a townhome or an apartment, but it definitely, you can get more density than the single family house with a manufactured house.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's good perspective. We're just about out of time. I think the last question I want to ask is there's questions or some confusion between like, chattel versus real property. And I know you probably touched on it a little bit, but I guess Maybe one last question would be, do you have any insight into just how that affects financing and how that affects insurance? Because there was a few things about insurance as well, whether that's homeowners insurance or something else.
Yeah, so I think chat like if it was a HUD code home, if whether there was land or not involved, you're probably still looking at probably 2.5 to 3.5% more when it's chattel versus a real property. I mean, it's I think that would probably be your cost increase. Like if you had a modular home on a lot, or if it was on a long-term lease, you have availability with modular to get traditional, 30-year mortgages and traditional financing. And I think that chattel, like I said, it'd be a couple percent more.
What about insurance?
Insurance requirements, I'm not 100% sure. I think some of that would be what would be required. I think both any type of loan you'd be required to get insurance. It may not on a total dollar amount. The HUD code home would probably be less just because you're insuring a lot lower dollar amount than you would on a traditional house. So I would think it's actually probably a little cheaper in that regard. But I don't actually have any good stats in front of me on current insurance costs between the types of housing right now.
Well, thank you. We are out of time. It is 1:30. I apologize. I mean, the questions keep coming in and they're great. I wish we had more time to answer them. I don't know, maybe Jillian, you could speak to that about how we could potentially follow up on some of these later, because I know there were some questions that were, kind of for specific speakers. So I don't know. I'll let you kind of close this out, Jillian. But I just want to thank everyone for attending. We had great attendance today, and thank you to my speakers for agreeing to talk today.
I'll second that, Josh. Thank you so much to you, Josh, and to Robert, Matthew, and Carter. I think it was a great presentation and thrilled by the amount of engagement we've had. To that point, sorry that we ran out of time. I will be providing a Q&A breakdown or a Q&A report for our speakers. So if there's something that catches their eye that may be worthy of touching base on after this webinar, they certainly, I know that they're happy to be a resource. And so I'll be providing that to our speakers. The slide decks will be just because of the high number of attendees, we almost hit 1,000 today. We'll likely be unable to send that out in a MailChimp, just due to Virginia to our chapter MailChimp restrictions. But we're happy to post that similarly to what we did a couple of months ago, where we posted it on the MAPC website page, which I linked a few times in the chat. Where you'll find the slides and the link to the recording, and the recording will go up within the next 48 hours on the MAPC YouTube page. But again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the webinar series to myself or to our APA Virginia board members or our other MAPC representatives. But thank you so much to all of our speakers for participating in our series, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us this afternoon.